But an expert is someone who's made all the mistakes possible in a given field, assuming you don't keep repeating them. So we're going to now welcome Megan Gilhooly, Senior Manager Content Strategy at Amazon Web Services, got it, on the power of learning you were wrong.
All right. So here I am between you guys and a really fun parade. So we're going to get to this. I want to take you back to 1997 in a place called Grand Forks, North Dakota. This was my hometown. I grew up here, I left for college, I came back, and I became a journalist at the Grand Forks Herald. The spring of 1997 followed one of the worst winters Grand Forks had ever seen in terms of volume of snowfall and blizzards. This is a legitimate picture from somebody's backyard. It was crazy. We expected a flood, but what we got was unthinkable. The two rivers that came together to make Grand Forks both crested higher than anticipated and at exactly the same time. The 50,000 residents of Grand Forks all evacuated as water came pouring over the levees that were there to protect our city. The Red River, which was typically a couple 100 feet wide, was now 20 miles wide. Grand Forks was buried in water. And just before midnight on April 18th, the Grand Forks Herald building where I worked took on water, halting the presses and stopping the printing of the April 19th paper. At this point, as a newbie in journalism, I thought, surely there's no reason for us to continue to print. Not only were our presses underwater, but there was nobody in town to deliver the news to. They were all spread out. Why would we continue to print? I didn't think it mattered. And then within the next 24 hours, an electrical fire started in downtown in one of the buildings. And because there was no way for the firefighters to get pressurized water up to the fire burned and burned, lighting the next building on fire, then the next, till the entire city block was on fire, and sparks flew over the flooded streets, lighting 2 other city blocks on fire. The fire spread from one building to another, and it raged on until most of downtown was ablaze. Despite the fact that the burning buildings were sitting quite literally in a river, they had to bring in the wildfire crews to fight this by air. And one of the buildings shown there right behind the fire truck is the Grand Forks Herald building. The building had burned down to its shell. So now, not only did we not have presses that worked, we didn't have a newsroom. We didn't have any of the resources that we as journalists use to tell the news. We didn't have our software. We didn't have our phones. We didn't have our phone books. We didn't have anything. So surely, we can't tell the news. And again, people were spread out all across the world at this point, certainly across the country, and they were getting news in other cities. So did it really matter? Publisher Mike Maidenberg and editor Mike Jacobs believed it did matter. And so they negotiated with the St. Paul Pioneer Press to have them publish our papers when they weren't publishing their own. And they set up a temporary newsroom in a tiny little town called Manville, North Dakota, in an elementary school, taking over 2 of the classrooms. And they called back all of the staffers that were able to come. They let us stay with our families if we needed to, but I was fine, my family was fine, and so 12 hours after I evacuated from my home, I went back to my burning and flooded city and got back to telling the news. I interviewed people that had been in critical care in the hospital when the flood came, and I interviewed the medical staff that were charged with transporting them somewhere else when we evacuated and keeping them alive. I spoke to relief workers who left lives and families behind to come help us through this situation. And I talked to one particular family I'll never forget who had safely evacuated to a small town in Minnesota, only to have the father and husband die fixing a car because he didn't have the safety gear he would have had back at his home in Grand Forks. And in talking to these folks, I learned that what we were doing did matter. It mattered to the people who were living through tragic times, who needed to tell their stories as part of their recovery. It mattered to the people who were evacuated, because now they were getting Grand Forks Herald wherever they were mailed to them, and it was their only tie back to the community that they had been forced to leave. The Grand Forks Herald didn't miss one day publishing the paper, and it mattered so much that the paper won a Pulitzer Prize for public service. And I learned the lesson of a lifetime. I had thought it wouldn't matter. I, as a person, a resident of Grand Forks, North Dakota, thought it didn't matter. And I couldn't have been more wrong. I realized at that moment that being human doesn't make me, on its own, an expert on humans. And that is a lesson that has stayed with me. And it shows up in my personal life constantly as I ask, are you sure that's the way customers will behave? Are you sure that's what our customers are thinking? How do you know? And this all came from that lesson. It's important for us to challenge our own assumptions about people, about technology, about how we do things. It's equally important for brands. Think about Heinz. Back in the late 1800s, Heinz came out with their octagonal bottle that everyone in this room knows and has seen. They believed that this bottle was such a foundation of their brand that if they put their ketchup in another bottle, no one would buy it. And that thought lasted for almost a century, to the point where they had commercials where they showed the bottle up close with ketchup slowly oozing out of it. Remember that? And at the end it said, "Good things come to those who wait." Now, I would have loved to have been at the table when finally someone had the audacity to say, "Who wants to wait for ketchup?" Right? But that person or that team didn't just challenge it. They came armed with data. They had gone to the customers. They watched how they used their ketchup. They saw how adults used it. They saw how kids used it. They asked questions. And they came back with very interesting results. The first is that the data showed that a plastic bottle is actually easier for both adults and kids to use. Okay, go figure. More importantly, 62% of the people said that a plastic container was worth purchasing even if it cost more. So the brand guys at Heinz were completely wrong. Not only would people eat Heinz ketchup out of a different bottle, they'd pay more for it. They learned their lesson and came out with the plastic bottle. And it took almost a century for them to get here. But the great thing is they learned a very valuable lesson. And that lesson is that while branding is important, customer experience is far more important. And they learned it well. They continued to do their customer research. And about a decade later, somebody realized that now with this plastic bottle, people were turning it upside down in the fridge so that all the ketchup would go down so it's easier to get out, right? So they came up with the upside down bottle. And it only took about a decade this time. That's powerful. All right, we don't always have to have these big, lofty situations to prove that either we're wrong or to learn a really good lesson. We can learn from everyday mistakes, but we only learn from our mistakes if we understand what caused the mistake. Now, sometimes, on occasion, the root cause is blatantly obvious. For example, if I walk into the bathroom with my phone in my back pocket, right, bad things happen. We know what caused that, and because I know that it happened because I had my phone in my back pocket, I now have learned a lesson. Never go into the bathroom with anything in my back pockets, right? Not a hard one. But it's not always that easy to figure out the root cause. So when we look at some of these things that happen to us as content people, let's say we add the wrong string to an email blast and we send it off to 70,000 people, and then we realize, oh, that was the wrong string. Let's say we publish a content error, it gets called out in social media, or we publish content before the product it's meant to cover goes live. These are bad things, right? We obviously want to be able to avoid these mistakes in the future. And how do we do that? We do that by understanding what caused the mistakes and how to mitigate that. So how do we get to the root cause? One thing I hear quite often is, well, ask why 5 times. Has anyone heard that? I should probably say, has anyone not heard that, right? Like it's a way. And sometimes it can be really effective, but sometimes it can kind of backfire. So let me give you an example. Let's take the situation. Sam sent the wrong string to 70,000 customers by mistake. Well, why did Sam make the mistake? Because he was in a hurry, and so he had a lack of time. Oh, well, why did he lack time? He had too much to do, and we just have too few resources, and so he just hurried through it. Well, wait, why do we not have enough resources? Well, quality's low, and so people are constantly fixing bugs. Why is quality low, right? And the answer to that then becomes people are making mistakes. So we have now just done the unmentionable. We have not only raised doubts about content quality and complained about lack of resources, neither of which has anything to do with the problem at hand, but we also started with people make mistakes and we ended with people make mistakes, right? So why 5 times can work if you actually are diving in deep into a really deep problem, but for something sort of this basic, it doesn't usually work. And the reason it didn't work here is because Sam is human. We shouldn't ask why Sam made a mistake. Maybe he just had a baby and is lacking sleep. Maybe he's sick. Maybe he was at LavaCon and is having a hard time getting his head back in the game. Who knows? He's human, right? Why he made the mistake is not the root cause. The conversation should be about what we can do to mitigate the impact of mistakes in the future, or better yet, what can we do to ensure that Sam and anyone else like him doesn't even have the opportunity to make that mistake in the future. So let's change it just slightly. Sam sent the wrong string to 70,000 customers by mistake. Why did the process allow Sam to send the wrong string? Oh, Well, our tools review workflow doesn't work, so he probably didn't know there was an updated version. When can we fix the workflow, right? We already are having a much more constructive conversation, and it's a much more powerful lesson for us. So let's talk about KPIs. A few people, Wendy talked about KPIs this morning. We heard about it earlier today. We all love KPIs. And what do KPIs do for us?
What's a KPI?
Key performance indicator. It's on the screen, Jack. It was. So, key performance indicators. These are things we use to prove what we did well. They prove whether or not we succeeded, right? In other words, we typically use them to prove that we were right. And you know who loves hearing that we're right? Our managers, our manager's manager, our executives. We need KPIs to prove to these people we're doing our stuff right. Do you know who could care less about your KPIs? Customers. So how do we do what's better for customers? So I have a friend that said, I've been at this organization long enough to know that I have to fix the stuff that I built. Now, it's really easy for people to come into a new org and go like, oh, they did something wrong. Or, oh my gosh, I can't believe how they built this, right? It's significantly more challenging to go into your own organization and look critically at the stuff that you built and to say, what did I do wrong? But we need to change the conversation. Instead of always trying to prove you're right, do that for the executives, yes, all that good stuff. If you want to work for the customer, change the question to what did we do wrong? Dive into the data, dive into the metrics, and try your hardest to prove yourself wrong. Because in this situation, the worst case is that you can't prove that you're wrong, which gives you a little more confidence that maybe you did something great for the customer, right? But the best case scenario is that you actually find new signals that show that maybe there's a better way to help your customers. And in either of those cases, the customers win. And that is powerful. Thank you.